Hey, really glad to see you this morning, Compass, and excited that we get to dive into a second week teaching through the Ten Commandments. If you were here last week, man, you got to kind of see a totally different angle that we're taking than maybe what you were expecting, a different way of relating to God than I think a lot of people do. And we said last week, that we talk about the Ten Commandments, and maybe somebody brings that up and you think, okay, well, I know what some of them are, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not, all the different things, but we don't necessarily know them all, right? And we think, okay, well, this is important that we probably know these because this is how you get to heaven, right? You got to do all these different things. And yet, as much as a lot of people buy into or ascribe to the idea that you have to do all these things to get to heaven, then a lot of us don't actually know what the Ten Commandments are, like if you had to list them all out, let alone in order. And so I thought we'd start just by putting them on the screen so that you can kind of see what the Ten Commandments are. So we start with 5. The first 4 really are about God and our relationship with God. So he says, no other gods before me, no idols, right? Don't make any idols. Then he says, I want you to not misuse my name. And then he says, I want you to keep the Sabbath day holy, right? So this is all related to our relationship with God. And then he kind of turns to our relationship with other people. He says, you want to honor your father and mother. And then he goes on to the last 5 that are on, there we go. Don't murder. These are the ones that we think of when we think of the Ten Commandments. Don't steal. Don't commit adultery. Don't lie. Don't covet, right? And so you're naming them all. Like, we just want to kind of give you some familiarity. We're studying through them all, but this is all of them up front. But what's interesting, right, when we think about this, is that these are not a condition for a relationship with God, not a condition for him to love you. This is what we said last week. The Ten Commandments are not a condition of God's relationship with us. Instead, they are confirmation of a relationship with God, right? This isn't conditional, like you do this and God will love you, you do these and God will accept you. No, instead it's evidence God already loves you. He has already accepted you, right? And yet a lot of people have this idea, like God gives us all these commands. He gives us these 10 commands, like, good luck, do your best, and maybe we think, I guess if I can keep 5 of them, 6 of them, maybe 7, maybe I'll be all right. Maybe I'll get to heaven one day. But what we learned is that God gave these commands to people he already had rescued. He had already delivered them out of slavery. He had already fought for them by sending plagues on their captors. He's already rescued them out of slavery, and that's when he gives them rules. We gave an example, right? Like parents with children. We're all children, but some of us have children, right? And when it comes to like giving rules to our children, why do we give our kids rules? Well, because it starts off, we want to keep them safe. Like, don't touch that hot stove. Don't stick your finger, right, into your light socket or to your brother's ear or whatever. We don't want to we want to protect them from danger. And then eventually it becomes more like, I want you to choose what's wise, right? We give them rules for how to live and how to make good decisions, all these things. It's not like we bring the baby home from the hospital and say, listen, here's some rules, and if you can keep these rules, we'll let you be part of the family, okay? Like, no. We bring them home from the hospital, they're a part of the family, and then we give them rules. So this is exactly how God treats us. We said also last week, it's like how I keep my dog in my fence at home. My fence is to protect my dog, to keep my dog safe, keep my dog from running away, because that's what she loves to do. And this is the same reason why God gives us rules, right, to protect us, to tell us what's safe, to keep us from running away from his will. Now, just because my dog gets out of my fence, that doesn't mean she's no longer my dog, right? Just because you've broken out of God's rules for your life doesn't suddenly mean you don't belong to him anymore. And likewise, you put my neighbor's dog into my fence, that doesn't make it my dog. Just because you obey God's rules doesn't mean you have a relationship with him, right? But God offers relationship first. And then once the relationship is established, then he gives us rules to live by, right? And this is what's so true. Before God wants to be wants you to be a rule keeper, he wants to invite you into a relationship with him through Jesus Christ. Before God wants you to be a rule keeper, a rule follower, he wants you to be in relationship with him. This is so important, okay? The first thing God told Israel to do, before he did anything else and before we get to the Ten Commandments, he told them to eat a meal, right? And if you're like me, you're like, okay, I can get down with a God like that, right? That's awesome. And he says, all right, as you make that meal, as you sacrifice this lamb that you're going to make for the meal, I want you to sprinkle some of the blood of that lamb over the doorpost. Okay, that's weird, but remember, you sprinkled the blood over the door. That was a sign so that when he came and delivered that last plague to Egypt, he would pass over the families who did that. In other words, the first command he gives his people, besides here, enjoy this meal together, is trust me. Just trust me, and then you're in. Trust me, and then I have you. I'll deliver you. Right? And then 3 months later, after they've gone out into the wilderness, they've gone up to Mount Sinai, then God, through Moses, starts to give them the commandments. Right? The relationship precedes the commands. And so we talked about that a whole bunch last week, and with that principle in mind, right, that rules aren't the condition for the relationship, they're confirmation for the relationship. And he starts to give these rules, and then I want us to think about, okay, well then what did he actually give them in terms of rules? Like, where did God start with that? And so we're going to look in Exodus chapter 20. Most of the text for this whole series is going to come right out of there. And notice, Exodus chapter 20, not Exodus chapter 1, chapter 2, like 20 chapters into this book. That's when we get to the law, okay? And in Exodus chapter 20, that's where we're going to read the commands. And we're going to look at the first two today. But here's what I want you to see. We're setting all this up. And when you look at the first two commandments God gives, that's not the first two commandments you and I would have given. If you were given free reign to establish rules for a society to live, you were going to give rules to your kids. You're going to give rules for what you felt like would make for a good life. You and I would probably start with some of the later ones, like, well, don't murder. That's probably a great one to start with. I mean, just don't kill people, right? And that seems like maybe a priority, but it wasn't the first one God started with, okay? And I think that God reveals something about his character by starting where he does, okay? And I think it's going to lead you and me, and this is where we're going today, to what is the second most important decision you'll ever make. Second only to your decision to trust Jesus as Lord and Savior, okay? This is going to lead you to make the second most important decision of your life, these first two commandments. Here they are. This is what God says through Moses to the people. Exodus chapter 20, starting in verse 2. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. No other gods besides me. No other gods instead of me. No other gods in addition to me, right? No other gods in my presence. I want to be your one and only God. And why would he say that? Why would that be important? Well, for this culture, and for all of human history before this moment, and for probably 2,000 to 3,000 years after this moment, 2,000 years, 1 to 2,000 years after this moment, there had never been a time that a culture in the world had ever had less than many gods. This is the first time in the history of mankind. Look it up. Go explore. Go look into history. Do some anthropology. This is the first time in human history that there was only one God. All other man-made religions worship many gods. And this remained the case in the course of history for more than 1,000 years after this moment with Moses. Why was it important for God to say, no other gods before me? I'm the one and only God for you? Because he is the one and only God. The only living God. And this is the first time in human history anybody knew that. It's the first time in human history that God made it clear, right? Instead of looking for multiple deities to satisfy all the things you need in life, right? Like all the world religions at this time, all the Egyptians, right, that they had just left their culture of for 400 years, they had a deity for agriculture. They had a deity for fertility. They had a deity for love, a deity for war, a deity for anything in their life. If you had a crop issue, you'd worship one God. If you had a relationship issue, you go and worship a different God. And God's saying, no, I want you to depend on me for everything. I want to be your one source for everything in your life. And this was brand new. I want to be your one and only God because I am the one and only God. And God starts here. This isn't where you and I would have started in terms of setting up society, in terms of telling people what's right and wrong and what's good and what's bad. This isn't where you and I would have started. But this is where God starts, because more important than obedience is recognition. Right? What's more important to God than obedience is recognition of who He is. And when we recognize who He is, when we trust Him for who He is, He takes center stage. Now, here's the cool thing. If you and I can settle this one thing, all the other stuff falls into place. We'll talk about that more in just a second. This is the starting place. A relationship with God, a relationship with your Heavenly Father. This is where it begins. And then here's the second command, right? He says, you shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. And to you and to me, that sounds like a repeat of the first one, right? No other gods before me, and you're not going to make any idols to worship either. And you and I, we think this sounds like exactly the same thing. Like, don't erect a statue. Don't put up a building, right? Nothing made with your hands is going to represent me. But again, this would have been tough for that culture to understand, especially for coming out of Egypt, where every god had an image, right? They would draw an image, or they would make a monument, or they would have a temple or a building or something. Every single god that they worshiped, little g, small, every deity that they worshiped had a place or a shrine or something. And when you went to that place, or you stood before that idol, or you stood in that shrine, that's where that god resided. And God tells through Moses, this is so strange, right? On Mount Sinai, you're not going to do that. You're not going to make or form an image that represents me. Here's the worst irony. Like, this was so ingrained in them. Literally, while God is giving Moses the 10 Commandments up on the mountaintop, what are the rest of the Israelites and Aaron doing? They're melting down gold and turning it into a calf, because for 3 months they haven't been able to lay eyes on their God. And so the people are like, we gotta make a calf so that we have something to worship. Right? We have to be able to see this God. And this is the first time in human history, it just blew their minds. They couldn't comprehend this, that God was unseen. That the real God is untouchable, uncontainable. He wasn't tangible, and that was brand new to them. Now, why am I emphasizing this so much? Because you and I, we were like, yeah, but I mean, very few people in our culture, Marty, like have physical idols. Like, I mean, I know there's parts in the world that still worship idols. I mean, that's still big in Hinduism and Buddhism and stuff like that. But like, we don't do that, do we? Right? And I'm telling you, it was in them to want to worship something specific, something tangible. And it's in you and me too. It's in you and me too. Like, just because it doesn't look like a golden calf doesn't mean that you and I aren't tempted to worship and to center our lives around something that is visible and tangible. And what God is saying is, don't try to manage me. Don't try to relegate me to one specific place or one specific object or one certain day of the week, because I'm not containable. I'm not manageable, right? I'm not going to be compartmentalized. I'm bigger than that. And it's in you and it's in me to be more like the Israelites were, to want to like worship God in a certain place. Like God is only at church, right? This is why we tell our kids, don't run in church. It's like, what? You mean like don't run inside? Like what difference does it make if it's in church? Or some of you are like, I can't believe I just cussed in church. You're like, what do you think? God doesn't hear you when you leave this building? Like we do this, don't we? We think, oh, I can't do that here in church. Like I can't drink in church. You're like, yeah, but I can drink in the bar, right? It's like God doesn't see that. Right? It's in us to compartmentalize God and think that it's okay, right, to do things in certain places or on certain days of the week because that's God's day. Sunday's God's day, or that's the Lord's house, like that building or whatever. And it's like, no. Like, remember, we said this a couple weeks ago, our bodies are the temple, right? God's house is wherever I go. So what is it that God's saying, right? And why is this so important? Well, because you and I are tempted in the same way as the Jewish people to try to manage God, to try to tell him what parts of our life are off limits and what parts he can have access to. Like which days, which places, which part of our money belong to God and everything else still belongs to us. Now look, it still applies to you and me today, but this was a brand new concept in the world, right? Let alone to the Jewish people, that God is not something that is seen and managed and touched. He is unseen. He is omnipresent, right? He is everywhere, and there's no object that I'm going to direct my worship towards. Instead, God is everywhere I go. It's a brand new concept. And so here's these first two commands. This is how God chooses to begin giving his law to his people. All of his boundaries, all of his guidelines. Don't have any other gods before me or besides me or in addition to me. Don't do it. I got to be your one and only. And then he said, and don't try to manage me. Don't try to compartmentalize me. Don't try to put me in your own little box. Don't try to like make me just one little component of your life to try to manage me. No. I'm not manageable. Now here's the beauty. If you and I can really wrap our heads and our hearts around these two commandments, you just about don't need any of the other ones. You almost don't need any other commands if you really start here, because if you have decided that God is going to be the one and only source for everything you need, you're going to depend on God alone for everything that you need, why would you steal? You wouldn't need to steal anything or take anything because you knew God would provide whatever you needed. If you were going to trust God and make him the center of your life when it comes to all of your relationships, well, then you'd never hate somebody enough to murder them. You'd trust that God would take care of justice, that he would have your back. If God is the center of your life, if he's really not competing with you with anything else for your heart, what would you covet? What else would you possibly wish you had? Right? You see how this list of rules, without these first two, right? Everything else is just a list of rules, but with these two first things in place, it starts with relationship. By the way, we said last week, if you just have rules with no relationship, it leads to rebellion. And that's what happens when we skip over these first two things and we think God just has a list of rules for us, a list of do's and don'ts. Well, then we can come up with all kinds of loopholes, right? Nobody's ever broken one of the other 10 commandments, like, thou shalt not give false testimony. You're not going to lie, okay? Nobody's in this room has ever lied and we didn't have a good reason for it, right? We always had an alibi. Like, Marty, like, really, this situation, obviously I couldn't tell the person the truth, right? I had to twist it a little bit. And everybody's like, well, you kind of have a point. And that's what happens when we don't have a relationship. If it's just a list of rules and we're just trying to obey things, then we'll come up with excuses, we'll come up with ways to kind of twist it and barely get by. And by the way, that's exactly what even the Jewish people did by the time of Jesus. They had sort of so twisted the law and the commands of God that they would kind of find loopholes and find ways to work around and everything to their advantage. And why would they do that? Well, that's what you do when you're the center of your world. When you're the center of your universe, then the rules are just there like as guidelines to help whenever you feel like it. If God is at the center of your life, well, then you're not looking for loopholes because it's a relationship. You're doing what he said to do because that's the best thing for your life. This is so important, right? By the way, this is the first place where he's going to pause and he's going to give some kind of conditions about this. He gets to the end of these first two commandments, and the second part of verse 5 here, he says, you shall not bow down to them or worship them because, right? Because, and here's a warning, I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. I don't know if you understood this or knew this, but God refers to himself as jealous, and I think what he's saying here, I don't want to compete with anything for first place in your life. I don't want to compete with anything else, anyone else, for your heart, for your time, for your money, for the credit, for the recognition, right, that I deserve. I deserve to be the center of your life. And you and I, when we see that and we hear the word jealous and we think, what, is God insecure? Right? That's what it means for you and me to be jealous, right? We're insecure, and so we're jealous. We're afraid that somebody that we're in a relationship with might, become attached to something else or somebody else, and we're jealous, and we fight that. But here's the verse. No. That would be true if it was any one of us, but because it's God, he's not insecure at all. Because he loves you and loves me and knows what's real, and the real truth is that he is the only God, that everything else is a false god, it's an idol, or worse, it's demonic. Any other little g god is not worth committing our life to. He is the only living God, and because he knows that, he sees that whenever we start devoting our attention towards something else, putting something else or someone else in the center of our life, he knows that is a train wreck ready to happen. And because he loves us so much, because he cares so much for us, he is jealous for whatever else might get our attention, whatever else might take front and center stage in our hearts. He's jealous because he knows that anything else in our lives, at the middle of our lives, doesn't work, right? It's bad for us. Life only works when he's in the center of it. And so he says, look, don't bow down or worship any of these other things, right? Because I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. And then he kind of gives this warning, punishing the children for the sin of the fathers to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, right? I punish the children of their fathers for 3 or 4 generations. You take me out of the center of your life. You put me in a room or try to manage me or put me on a certain day of the week, or you don't recognize who I am. Not only will you suffer, but your kids, your grandkids, and maybe even your great-grandkids are going to suffer. And you and I read that, and if you imagine you're reading this for the first time, you read that and you say, that's not fair. And I think God in some ways would respond, well, who said anything about fair? All I've said so far is that I'm jealous. Okay? Where did you get your idea of fair? But here's the deal. I don't know that this is about multi-generational punishment so much as it's about multi-generational consequences. And you and I do see that. Right? You and I understand. How many of you grew up and you grew up and now you are a lot like your parents in the way that you act and the way that you talk, right? Be honest, because your spouse is here and they'll tell you what's true, okay? Right? How many you ever had kids of your own and one day you opened up your mouth and your dad came out? It was like, where did that come from, right? It's because that's in us. We can't help it, right? Some of you've had struggles as adults because of decisions and struggles that your parents had or that your grandparents made. Right? Maybe your parents or your grandparents got a divorce. And as a result, there's been tension, there's been bitterness, there's been dysfunction in your life. Maybe you were abandoned or neglected when you were a kid, and so now you're having trouble connecting with your own kids. Right? This is the natural consequences. It's not so much what's fair, it's just simply true. That the decisions and mistakes that we make affect the next generation and sometimes multiple generations. It's not an excuse for our kids to make bad choices, but it always has an effect, or financially, right? If our parents like get ruined financially, it's going to have an impact on how we grow up. It's going to have an impact on how we see money and how we, handle it and those kind of things. Is that fair? No, it's not fair. But is it true? Yeah, it's always true. It has an effect. Alcoholism. Right? Exie's got a half-brother. I've never met him, but she's got a half-brother who's got Down syndrome. And he has Down syndrome. He has that disease because his mother chose to drink while she was pregnant with him. And we know that all children, even if it's not a physical consequence, maybe you're physically fine, but your parents drank, and so you have emotional wounds that you carry around. We know that children of alcoholics are 4 times more likely to drink and become alcoholics themselves. Right? Your decisions, your behavior affect your kids and your grandkids, sometimes your great-grandkids. That's just the way it is. There's no denying it. We know there are consequences of the decisions that we make. And so think about it as a consequence or a punishment or just a natural occurrence, but God already is warning us, listen, if you arrange your life around anything other than me, there's going to be negative consequences for multiple generations. But then he gives us this awesome promise too, the flip side of that coin, and it's even better. It's even better than the bad news. The good news is even better than the bad news. This is what he says, verse 6, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. Listen, Israel, because I have already rescued you, because you're important to me, you need to understand what happens if I don't come first in your life. You need to understand what happens if you try to compartmentalize me the way that other people compartmentalize their idols and their gods. And what happens is if I'm not the center of your life, your negative decisions and the consequence of your actions are going to trickle down into your family. But here's the deal. I will show love and blessing to 1,000 generations. This is a lot longer, right? Because if you do put me front and center, that's going to have a big ripple effect as well. In other words, what you and I decide to do about God will affect not only our kids and our grandkids, but potentially many, many generations of our descendants that we will never meet this side of heaven. You want to think about a legacy, you want to think about what you're doing to affect the future. Man, what you decide to do with God, God promises you will impact future generations, many of whom you and I will never get to meet until one day in eternity. More important than not stealing, more important than not killing, more important than not coveting, right, is this foundational decision to recognize God for who he is, to make him front and center in our lives, and to organize our lives around him exclusively. This is the second most important decision of your life, right? You come to faith in Jesus, you decide to make him the Lord and Savior of your life, but here's the deal. Will you value the Lord above anything else? Right? What will you value? What's the Lord of your life? Who is at the center of your life? How will you organize your life? This is the second most important question you'll ever answer. It will either be God or it will be someone or something else. And God lays it out right here at the beginning of the 10 Commandments. Look, nothing else is going to matter if you don't get this right. But if there is something in your life of such great importance that you organize your life around it, guess what? It's taken the seat that belongs to God. It's taken the place that God and only God is designed to take in your life. Right? What is it that you make all your decisions based around? What's the filter you run every decision through? Right? What affects your finances? What affects your schedule, your time? Right? You say, God, I need you to help me with this thing in my life. You stay over here, God. Right? You stay here on Sundays. You stay here when I pray. I'll come get you when I need you. In the meantime, this, God, is what I want you to help me with because this is front and center. What is that for you? Because it's in me and it's in you to put something else front and center besides God. We organize our life around it. We make all of our decisions. We spend all of our time and money over it. And we've replaced God with it or that person. And more than likely, whatever that is for you, it's been made into a country song, right? Brad Paisley has a song, right? I'm gonna miss her. The lyrics go, said I'd have to choose if I hit that fishing pole today. She'd be packing all her things and she'd be gone by noon. Well, I'm gonna miss her, right? And it's like, okay, yeah, so she makes you choose between fishing and her. You're gonna send her packing, right? And some of you, like, here's the sad thing, that's not a song to you, right? That's just your life. I heard about a guy who told his minister friend, I won't tell you who because you might know who they are, but he said, he's a single guy. Minister was asking, hey, did you ever think about getting married? He said, well, actually, I got pretty close to getting married a couple times, been engaged a couple times, but both my fiancés, they gave me an ultimatum. They said, look, it's either me or it's deer season. And I said, you know, deer season's important and getting married is important, but deer season's importanter. And so he's still single, right? And it's sad, but you're right, we feel sad, but you know, here's the real sad part. Someday he's going to meet a woman who's going to be fine taking a back seat to deer season, right? Going to be fine taking a back seat to hunting. And that's all going to work out well until they have their first child. And she's at home with the kid, and she's doing the diapers, and she's taking care of it. Meanwhile, he's out drinking beer and shooting deer, okay? And that's not going to work because that's not how our lives were designed to be organized. There's nothing wrong with marriage and there's nothing wrong with hunting. But if you make your spouse or you make hunting or some other hobby or your kids the center of your life, it's like driving a car that is out of alignment. It is going to be stressful. It is going to be a struggle trying to keep things centered. You're constantly, you feel these pulls in these different directions, and it's going to be stressful. You're going to wonder, why am I so tired all the time? Why am I so stressed all the time? Why can't I seem to get on top of all this? And it's because you've put something else in the center of your life that was supposed to be God's place, but you put God over here on the side. You said, no, God, you're only God some of the time, part of the time, for some of my life, for certain parts of my life, but not for this. This is what's most important to me, and that's not how life was designed to work. Okay? Nothing wrong with it. Here's the thing. We never center our lives on something bad, right? Right? It's never like, you know what I want my life to be all about? I want it to be all about murder, you know? Like, we never do that, right? At least I hope, right? Some of you, there might be a serial killer somewhere in here. The truth is, we'd never know. Just a little freaky. Enjoy that. Sleep well. But most of us, right, we never pick something bad to center our lives around, to organize all of our time and all of our money around. It's never something bad. It's always something that we think is noble or something good, right? It's our kids, or it's our spouse, or it's our hobby, or it's our career, right? It's always something good. But here's the problem. When a good thing becomes a little g, God thing, a good thing becomes a bad thing. When a good thing becomes an idol, we've broken the second commandment. We've chosen to worship it. We've broken the first commandment. We've chosen to worship it and let it be a competition for God, for who's going to have control over our heart. And so that good thing actually becomes a bad thing because it's become a God thing. And you and I were not designed to live that way. And God is jealous of that. He sees that in our lives, and He doesn't want that for us. He wants what we were designed for, which is a relationship with Him at the center, so that He tells us what's right and wrong, so that He tells us what to prioritize. This is not how you and I would have written the commands, but it starts with recognizing who God is and organizing our lives around His importance and His preeminence in our lives. Now, we're all given this choice. Second most important decision you're ever going to make, second only to whether or not you're going to trust Jesus for salvation, for saving you, is, am I going to organize my life now around God or something else? And here's the temptation. The temptation is, I don't know if I can do that. Because if I God first, then what about these other things I need? What if God doesn't deliver? What if God sort of... See, secretly, I think that we assume that God, if I'm going to follow you first, then you're just trying to make me a good person, and I don't like it when people try to make me a good person. I don't like it when people try to tell me what to do, because what they're really trying to do is keep me from something good, right? God's trying to make me good, but no, I think he's trying to keep me from something good. I might miss out on something good if I surrender to him, if I completely trust him. And that's what's in us. We think, okay, if I really surrender this, then somehow I'm going to miss out on something that I want. But here's what it is, and this is why we push back on it, and this is why we buck, right? God's commands. Listen, he's not trying to make you good. Who are we going to be good compared to? Him? No. He's not trying to make us good. He's trying to protect us. Here's what he's trying to do. He's trying to keep us free. What's he saying to the Jewish people? Listen, I've already rescued you out of slavery. Now I want to keep you free. And he knows that if we put anything else at the center of our lives and our devotion, we organize our lives around anything other than him, we're slipping right back into slavery. Right? When you and I resist his law, it's backing ourselves back into slavery, back into bondage. He's not trying to make you a good person. He already loves you and already accepts you. He's trying to keep you free. And if we can get this in our heads, man, if we can let this trickle down and get into our hearts, this will change everything about how you approach obedience to God. Because before God wants obedience, he wants recognition. So he starts the 10 Commandments and he says, don't have anything else before me. So we say, okay, God, you come first. I'm not going to have any other gods, any other things that I'm going to worship. Nothing else is going to compete with you for my heart. And he says, don't have any idols. Okay, God, I'm not going to try to manage you. I'm not going to try to contain you to one place or one thing. I'm not going to make you something that I can see or control or observe. No. You're bigger than that. And so I'm not even going to try. I'm just going to trust you. Now, how do we resolve this? How do we know if we've replaced God with some other little g God in our lives? Well, I'll give you a few clues, a few breadcrumbs you can sort of follow. There's a couple things that you can check right now and you can see. How do you spend your time and how do you spend your money? Look at your calendar, look at your bank account. How do you spend your time? How do you spend your money? This is a clue into what we really center our lives around, okay? And again, it might not be a bad thing. It might be a perfectly good thing. But has it become a God thing? Has it taken God's rightful place as the priority of our lives, as the center that we arrange everything else of our lives around? Didn't Jesus say, right, hey, wherever your treasure is, that's where your heart will be? Look, you start spending all your money towards something, eventually that's what all that you're going to think about and all that you're going to care about, okay? And sometimes we get lured into this, even with all the best intention in the world as a Christian, right? Yes, Jesus, you're the Lord of my life. And then all of a sudden the career takes off and like that takes all of our time and all of our attention and all of our devotion. And then life starts to get stressed and we wonder why. Or we start putting on our spouse, right? I start believing that everything that I need needs to come from my wife. And then I start experiencing tension in my marriage. I wonder why. She's not God. I'm not God. Right? No wonder when we center our lives around even our marriage that doesn't work out. Most of us make the mistake, right? We say, all right, God, I'm starting this relationship with you. I'm learning what it means to trust you. So here's the cool thing, God. God, you listening? This is what's important to me, God. This is what I've been pursuing all my life. And so here's what I want you to do, God. I want you to bless this, right? This is what my life's all about. Thank you for being here on Sundays and when I pray. God, I want you to make this successful. And you know what happens when we say, God, will you help make this little g God thing that I've centered my life around successful? God says, nope, I don't do that. I don't compete. I'm either center or I'm not on the map. Because if you center your life around anything besides me, it's not going to work. It's not compatible. So this is why the most important decision you'll ever make in your life after you become a Christian is to say, God, will you be the center of my life? Can I arrange everything else around you and make you the priority? And some of you wonder, like, how are these people, like, experiencing all this kind of stuff? Because my life is stressed out. Like, I don't understand. And if I surrender everything to God, what happens if I don't get the things that I really need and all this kind of stuff? And so here's the deal. This idea, this decision of surrendering everything to God scares you. It freaks you out because it means I got to trust him. And I don't know if I'm ready to do that. And I get it. It is scary. But here's the other thing I know that's true about this decision is that everybody who does surrender their life and put God center stage, they experience a peace that nothing else and no one else in this world can ever give them. Surrender is where we finally discover and experience the life he wanted us to have. There's no getting around it. There's no shortcuts. He's either center or he's not there. The way Jesus said it was this in Matthew 6, verse 33. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. And then all these other things that the world runs after, that everybody really wants or thinks they need in their life, all these other things will be added to you as well, or will be given to you as well. It's the first two commandments. Make God the center, your one and only source for everything that you need. Don't try to manage him. Don't try to relegate him to certain days or certain parts of your life. No. Give him full access. Let him have everything. And I know it's scary, and I know it frightens you, the idea of just completely surrendering. But listen, when you do, you experience a peace that is not found anywhere else. This is what it means when we really trust Jesus, not only for salvation, but to be Lord, to be master of our lives. Let me pray for you. God, I'm so grateful that we can study in these 10 Commandments, this familiar section of the Bible, and discover new things about the depth of your love for us, that you are fighting for us, fighting for our attention. God, that you're not content to let us wander from you. You come and chase after us. God, that you designed life to work well, and when we don't arrange our lives around you, it doesn't work well. And you're like, I told you, please come home. Experience my peace. God, it's not punishment. It's just natural consequences. What happens with life when we don't hold the table? And it's the natural gravity in our lives, God, when we let other things take center stage. But God, today could be a freedom day. Today can be a day when people finally surrender and experience the goodness and the blessing. It doesn't mean everything's going to go perfectly, but it's not our circumstances that give us joy anymore. It's you. It's knowing you're fighting for us. It's knowing that we're accepted by you, that we are loved by you more than we could ever imagine. God, I pray that everybody listening to this message today might get to experience that with the decision to surrender today. That's my prayer in the powerful, wonderful, beautiful name of Jesus. Amen.